Good morning. Good morning. My name's Tammi Dice. I am currently a doctoral student at Old Dominion University with my focus on counselor education. How did I get here? Well, this time. I mean, as many of you know, many of you do not. I mean, I was actually a patient here at the Farley Center. This place saved my life, and it intervened in my life at a pivotal time. So when Farley calls, I always listen. I mean, the men and women here working at Farley are doing a special, really great job. But how did I get here in a lecture about cultural sensitivity with you? I'm obviously a mid-40s, adult white male, in shape, former Navy SEAL, hardly the poster child of someone who speaks to diversity issues. How did I end up here? Early on in my undergraduate and graduate studies, I was placed in several lectures with some profound instructors who touched me in a way, made me realize that I held certain privileges I've had my whole life. And I had this almost like a come to Jesus moment of, wow, what am I going to do with these? And so my focus from there forward has been a very passionate one of working with these different underserved communities. And it's been one of like, what am I going to do with this? Where am I going to go? That path has led here today. So before I take up too much time.
And hi, I am Dr. Tammi Dice. I'm an assistant chair in Counseling and Human Services Department at ODU and the program director for Human Services. Similarly, I graduated with my master's and became a school counselor and was working in inner city schools with kids and just realized that I wasn't equipped. My education in my master's program hadn't equipped me well to meet the needs of these underserved children and that were so marginalized and faced so many barriers in their process. And so that led me to my PhD, and I've focused since then on research and presenting and writing on issues of equity and access for marginalized populations. But with that said, I am not the knower of all, clearly. I strive to be culturally humble, not culturally competent. And in that, I look to shared experience, look to these situations like workshops to be a socially constructed understanding of these topics so that we continue to grow and learn together. And with that, we will be asking for a lot of your input. You know, what knowledge can you all bring to this workshop? What experience can you share that will help contribute to everybody's learning experience today? So.
All right. With that said, food for thought. We've shared with you a little bit about us. Now we're going to ask for you to share a little bit about you and your thoughts on this topic. So there's 3 questions I have up behind me. We're going to focus on each one for a few minutes here, and I want some feedback from you. This is a moment where I'm asking you to give me something to work with here. The first question, what factors make communication with those culturally different from you challenging? This isn't just for you, what's a challenge for you? What do you perceive as being challenging in the counseling field or in the therapy room?
Age differences, age gaps.
Yes.
I currently work with a lot of individuals for whom they're like 50 plus, my late 20s. So I'm trying to assist and talk to them about things when they're kind of in the mindset of what do you know or how have you been in my shoes.
Instantly, the moment you walk into the room, the moment you sit down, there's instantly this age gap. All right, so what else?
I think race and gender can certainly.
That's the obvious ones, right off the bat. Race, gender. Yes, ma'am.
I would say economics. We talk about basic needs such as like having food in the household, being able to have a good night's sleep. It's like how can I work for you and I don't have my basic needs, or how can a child go to school and behave and they're able to get.
Like you're 2 different worlds. For all they know, you are making $100 an hour and you're keeping all that money. I mean, there's instantly a gap there. What else?
I have an invisible disability, but that able-bodied versus disabled.
Yes, for your end there, you're walking in and there's an instant assumption from your side. Yes.
I mean, it's difficult enough with the realization that none of us are identical. We grow up with different experiences, and then couple that with the cultural differences. Trying to understand another person's perspective is just outright complicated sometimes. And with my own filters and recognizing that I might not be hearing what the person's saying, or understanding the rationale behind the behavior that I'm seeing, it just makes it difficult and a challenge.
You've almost encapsulated our objectives today. Next question is, relative to your own cultural identity, what are ways in which others have interacted with you that are insensitive or inappropriate? Yes, ma'am.
The assumption that everyone is Mexican.
Yes.
When you know you're not Mexican.
Exactly. So they're stepping on your toes the moment they walk in the door.
Exactly.
So you can't hear back here.
Okay.
Could you either repeat or?
I'll repeat the question. Great. Good point. Yeah. The assumption that everyone is Mexican. Yes, sir.
As we were talking earlier, I'm 62, and I still feel 18. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the younger generation is just sometimes outright dismissing me and what I have to say, and that's really uncomfortable because I don't like to be dismissed.
Right? Okay. Yeah, so you're not feeling heard as a therapist.
I guess it's some cultural stereotypes. If somebody hears my last name is Ramos, and I'll say it like that, or do you want the English version? Ramos. Oh, so you're, sometimes they'll say Spanish. What? You're Filipino? You don't look Filipino. All of those stereotypes. You don't sound like, but English actually was my second language. And then that assimilation, when you're looking at first generation here or generation, born elsewhere, there's so many stereotypes. And sometimes I don't know which way somebody wants me to be. And so I find sometimes it comes off very insensitive in the beginning, and it's a hard barrier to overcome when developing a relationship sometimes.
These are all excellent points. I mean, these are coming from people who are more culturally sensitive, more culturally attuned than someone who hasn't had the education or the background that we have in this room. So keep in mind that we're going to be even more hyper aware of what's going on. The last question is, how do you know if your communication is culturally sensitive or not? I mean, just looking in the mirror and rehearsing to yourself, you're not going to catch it. How do you know if what you're saying is coming out the way you intend? Just straight questions, yes?
Their expression when you're speaking.
The nonverbals, yes. And they can pick up on ours too. All right, we're going to explore each and every one of these guys. We've used your feedback, kind of make an outline for this slideshow, and we're going to feel free to bring these points up again if you feel like they weren't addressed.
And so when we're looking at communication, we kind of have a feel for what feels right or what doesn't. But as helpers and therapists, we need to do more than that. We have to engage in thorough self-awareness. Who am I as a cultural being? We can't know others until we know ourselves. We have to obtain knowledge of the cultures of others. But that extends well beyond the individual. We need to challenge ourselves to understand the social structures in which individuals live. So recognizing how the social institutions either provide opportunity or barriers for our clients. And through this understanding, then we can acquire the skills to communicate effectively.
All right. So why does this matter at all? Why do we put so much emphasis on this? Why have you taken time out of your schedules to come down here and sit down? Why does this matter? What are the big reasons?
Use it every day.
You have to use it every day. What else?
we have up here.
Question behind.
Yes, ma'am.
You want to make sure that the relationship that you're having with your client, or even, when you're getting to know someone, you want to make sure that, it's respectful, that you're building the proper rapport with that individual, and it's welcoming.
Promote the healthy relationship, being respectful, being welcome. Let the client feel heard. What else? Yes, sir. Were you shooing a fly? Still counts. Yes, ma'am.
When you are building that rapport, it creates a level of trust with your client.
Yes.
You are ready to
So they're building the rapport. You're building a level of trust. You're cracking the door. You're letting them in. Yes.
If you know Scott Miller, he's doing a lot of research about what works in therapy, and his research suggests that it's got little to do with the technique or the tool. It has more to do with the relationship between the therapist and the client that seems to make the difference in change for the client.
It's all about the relationship. But to ensure that, guys, we're ethically bound. There isn't a code of ethics out there that doesn't have a portion devoted to being culturally sensitive, culturally aware. I mean, it's all about preserving a relationship, doing no harm. If you're sitting down with a patient for the first time, this is their first exposure to a therapist, you are representing all of us. Don't give us a bad name.
Yeah.
Okay? They may turn their backs on therapy for the rest of their lives.
But it isn't easy. We are all taught about who we are and who we are compared to others from the earliest days in our homes, in our communities. And so when we are being asked to view the world through different lenses, to perspective take from the angle of somebody who is culturally different from us, then it is uncomfortable. And it can cause cognitive dissonance. But that discomfort is of value. We use that discomfort to help us to grow and to help us to learn and develop into more cognitively complex people who have the ability to engage in the flexibility needed to be effective with those different from us. So even today, as you're experiencing some either questioning or resistance or discomfort around any of the material or the activities we ask you to engage in, take the time to sit back and say, why am I uncomfortable with this? Where is this coming from? And might I need to see this more as cognitive dissonance rather than a rejection of the material or the information? And challenge yourself to push through that so that the learning can acquire. And when I teach diversity issues at ODU, I start out my class with my students with the Walt Whitman statement that is, this course will challenge your perspectives on everything you learned at home, school, and church. And I say that not to say I'm going to change everything about what you've learned, but really to say this is an invitation to see through a different lens and to obtain empathy about the normal and healthy practices of others that just simply might be different from your normal and healthy practices. All
right, let's begin with understanding and recognizing that we can't look at someone monoculturally. We can't sit down and say, okay, I see the difference, and boom, I'm going to deal with this person in the way I see them. We have to know that there's many, many different levels to be dealt with. This giant word up here, intersectionality, it's been around for a while, but it's really taken hold in the last couple of years. In fact, that it's become a core way of approaching diversity, that the client must be viewed as a multitude of layers, overlapping layers that intersect with each other. It's not just someone a lower SES or someone of a, of a minority status gender. It is the intersection, it's the compounding effect. And these overlay with different privileges. I mean, it's almost like a multidimensional way of viewing a client. And they all exist simultaneously. It's not just 1 + 1 = 2. It might be 1 + 1 plus another one equals this complex way of viewing the client. And this also can work to our advantage because by looking at all these different dimensions of the client, we can realize there may be layers of overlap that we share. We may have more in common with this client than we realize if we take the time to view them through all the different lenses of which they are.
And with intersectionality, we can recognize how parts of identities combine to create experience. So and this was founded in a large court case that took place against General Motors, where African American females were charging General Motors with discrimination on the basis of them being both African American and female. And General Motors said, well, no, you have to pick one of those. You can either charge us for being female or you can charge us on the basis of race, but the combined impact, we don't acknowledge that. And so this intersectionality came, the model, the theory, actually stemmed from that court case because it became a huge issue. Wait a minute, it's the combined impact of being female and African American that is resulting in the discrimination and experience at General Motors. And so, from that came this whole understanding that, wait a minute, we can't isolate and look at people either monoculturally or with their identities and as separate entities, but rather we must understand the combined and intertwined and interwoven experience of identity. And we both have marginalized identities and privileged identities. Almost every one of us. There are so few people out there that are marginalized across the board or privileged across the board. We hold a combination of both. And there's a lot of benefit to that because with that, we can understand the experience of both. So when we hold marginalized identities, we know what it's like to experience greater barriers than those who are privileged compared to us. That also challenges us to be able to say, but in this area, I am privileged. So now I need to take my understanding of being marginalized to be able to understand how I'm actually privileged and hold fewer barriers in this area in my life. That's far harder for us to do. And yet, we must do that in order to be effective helpers. It's particularly challenging to individuals when they hold multiple marginalized identities, though. And our understanding of that and those barriers can become really helpful tools with regard to providing services and providing interventions that are going to be best meeting the needs and also helping to remove some of those barriers.
All right. Now, taking what we've just reviewed and gone over, we're going to apply it to something. I'd like to introduce you to Tom. All right. Tom, he's an amazing character. I'm very passionate about what Tom's going through. I'd like for you, as you view this video, to jot down real quickly the different identities you see Tom associating with. All right? So let me introduce you to Tom.
My name is Tammi Dice, and I'm writing about of love. I perform it all about me and my learning to be in love with another guy.
Fun, intelligent, smart, honest guy who is looking for Mr. Right or just some fun. I have a really creative mind, so I'll probably wake you up during the night because I have an idea, but it's just who I am. He's desperate to fall in love. He really wants to fall in love, and it's something that you can't really hurry. And I just care for him so much, I just don't want him to get hurt. But that's the mum in me coming out. And that's what I have to back off because he's my friend, he's not my son.
a lot of Thai people with disabilities. I'm writing about love because I want to make people understand. I think I'm in love with another guy.
He just enjoys every day and lives it to the max. And that's very infectious.
I don't want to give too much away, but there's a scene at a gay sign-up because it's important that people understand.
I need to don't go on the lab again. For on my lab, everything I'm in full on.
Wow, that's powerful. I mean, that chokes me up just watching it every time. Okay, so as hopefully you guys took some time to jot things down, what identities do you see Tom associate with?
Inherited in some way. And he's
This
gay.
disability.
Yeah, disability. Gay and English, apparently.
Gay
Or-
and English.
Yeah.
Okay, 3 identities. Yes. What else? Yes, ma'am.
Creative, and he wants to educate.
Creative, has an awareness and wants to help others, educate. Yes, he wants to get his message out. Yes.
He's an artist.
He's an artist. Yes. All right, we're getting him here. What else?
The obvious, he's male.
He's male. There you go. He's a white male. Yes.
He's young,
He's young,
and he's physically disabled.
physically disabled. Yes. I mean, what else? What did you kind of, from that short introduction to his life?
Music, movies, making a movie. He's making a
He's
documentary.
making a movie. Yeah, he's technically savvy. Right? What else?
We've got an older friend. The woman is much older.
He appears to have some sort of a support network. Yes. What else? What SES do you think Tom subscribes to? Yes. What socioeconomic status do you think he falls in? Not poor, maybe middle. I mean, he's going out to clubs, hanging with friends. He seems to have some access to technology. I mean, these are all. Yes, ma'am.
Or he may live in some kind of supported environment. I'm not sure. The lady was his friend. Or she was his mother, right?
His friend. Yes, his best friend, BFF.
Okay.
Best friend forever.
So where are his parents?
So, as a therapist, having a more complete picture of Tom, how would that play out in the counseling room, in the session?
How would knowing those identities, how could you use that to help him? How would it help shape your interventions?
Yes, sir.
To give you an idea as far as what type of goals that Tom may be striving to achieve and accomplish, because based off the video, he wants a sense of normalcy. Probably doesn't want to be treated as different or looked at as different. And so knowing that as opposed to focusing on his disability. Instead of focusing on what he can't do, what can he do, and what does he want to do.
That's right. Take into play what are his strengths. Exactly.
Well, some of the things he likes to do would lead to areas of possible support networking, friendship, activities, making movies, music, going out. So it's not just disability, it's not just gay, he has all these other interests.
He has a passion. Gosh, I mean, that is by far his biggest strength going, is he has a passion for this. Yes, sir.
I mean, he says, "I want to be in love." I mean, that's a word that contains a lot of different things. I want to be accepted. I want to be cared for. I want to be nurtured. I want to be cherished. There's a whole bunch of different things that are contained in that word.
Exactly. Yes, ma'am.
And I don't think we know anything about his family.
This is just a small snapshot of Tom.
But knowing that he is white and appears to be middle class based on his access to technology and his what he was demonstrating in his social environment, those things can be used because they become privileges in many ways. People will listen to him more, right? His voice will be acknowledged more as a white male. So you can build on that. You can use that as part of your helping process.
I know. Would this be a different picture if Tom were black or Tom were poor? It'd be a different picture, a different compilation of identities form a different therapeutic picture. Your interventions would be different. And that's what we're talking about here, that your interventions must be tailored to the different facets of his identity.
And if we were just to focus on the fact that he is gay and has a disability, then we might fail to recognize how the overlay of his other multiple identities also must come into play in order to determine how to best assist and what resources are more readily available or less readily available, and how to draw from those to meet him in a holistic manner.
Yes, sir.
One thing I want to say is that he's had a great deal of success with it because look at it popping up and we're all watching it. It's a video.
Yeah.
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 He also knows what he wants and what he looks like.
Yes.
Yes.
And knows what he wants and what he looks like. Yes.
So how did that happen? That's the question.
It appears Tom's had a lot of support, been working with people.
So we are, it's useful. We are aware of the value in understanding how multiple identities can influence and impact a person's experience. So what does this mean? By acknowledging the challenges, particularly of holding marginalized statuses, we can stop subscribing to the myth of meritocracy, and we can help to avoid engaging in intentional and unintentional discrimination.
Dr. Dice, what is the myth of meritocracy?
Does anybody know, what is the myth of meritocracy? What is the myth of meritocracy?
I'll take a stab at it. Basically, this whole if you work hard enough, you can get whatever you want. The playing field is level and even.
Exactly.
You just got to work hard enough.
Yes, and basically it's saying that all individuals are on an equal playing ground. That, and it's founded in the principles of our nation. We have this sense that if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you work hard enough, anybody can achieve the American dream. And I mean, it's a noble, wonderful concept, but it's a myth because there are differences in access and equity depending on who you are. But because meritocracy is really the foundation for our value system in this country, what ends up happening is if people who are of marginalized status and are faced with challenges and barriers to access and equity, that's not seen. That will often be overlooked. And it will be assumed that individual challenges or traits or cultural traits are the reason that they're not achieving. As opposed to saying, let me pull back from that, recognize that meritocracy is a myth, and see the broader systemic social factors that are making some people's ladders this tall while other people's ladders are this tall.
Let me jump in here, guys. I feel an activity coming on. Can I borrow this real quick? Sorry. All right. This is an unscripted activity, but it's my myth of meritocracy activity. All right. I'm going to need 100% participation. Can you guys agree to that? Everyone in here is going to do their very best to do what I'm asking you to do next. All right. All right. Can you, somewhere on your table, find a piece of paper, preferably not one of our activity handouts. It could be any size piece of paper. And hold it up. Everybody needs to have one piece of paper.
You can share.
You can share.
Well,
no, you can't
everyone
share.
has to have one
Everybody
piece
has to have, hold it up, one piece of paper. Everyone has one piece of paper. There, we are all equal. Good, good. We all have a piece of paper. Now, all right. Let's see here if I can do this. All right. I need everyone to give me their maximum effort. I want you to do is crumble up that piece of paper. Crumble it up, make a nice hard paper ball. All right. Hold that ball up. Now, this may sound unethical, but it's for a good reason. On the count of three, now you have to stay in your seat, don't let anybody move. On the count of three, I want you to throw that paper ball at me as hard as you can. On the count of three.
You have to hit him.
I'm pretty tough. I'm pretty tough. It's not going to hurt me. You guys too. All right, you guys too. All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. You guys up here nailed me. Good job. I mean, you guys nailed me. I mean, you guys did good too. You guys, I see there are a lot of people, not so much. I mean, you guys in the back, what's up? I mean, that wasn't even close. Not even close. I mean, you all had the same opportunity to hit me. You all had a piece of paper. I had the same size for all of you. You guys up here, good job. I mean, you guys you saw, you executed. Back there, I mean, did you not put any effort in? There's an unearned privilege of sitting here and hitting the target. And as the privilege, the challenges increase, so does the access to opportunity. All right? The myth of meritocracy. Where are you sitting in the room? All right. Thank you. All right.
And so, having that awareness is so key, but it's really difficult to do. It's really difficult when people are in positions of privilege to own that, because you all worked really hard. It doesn't mean that folks with privilege aren't working hard. It just means that there are fewer barriers to achieving the success. And it really challenges us to recognize that meritocracy is a myth, despite the fact that, I'm a good person. I don't condone racism. I don't condone sexism or ageism or ableism or heterosexism. But it's systemic, and there are so many examples of these ladders. One example is our children. We have 5 children. We live in an upper middle class neighborhood, and those kids in public education, they attend a school where during the first couple days, they were issued what they call Chromebooks, their very own laptops that they get to take home with them and use, full access to every one of the textbooks that they're using. In addition to that, we're educators, so we give them the 2 hours of homework time a night that they need to sit there. If they need a tutor, boy, we're going to hire it for them, make sure. And I do programming for children in urban settings in public schools in Hampton Roads that serve subsidized housing in Norfolk. Those children are sharing books. Those children come to school hungry. Those children, many have parents working 2 jobs just to put some food on the table. So are they spending 2 hours sitting down doing algebra with their kids? No, they're at work. Those kids are sharing pencils by January, in addition to sharing their textbooks. Whose ladder is higher? Is that those kids' fault? My kids have unearned privilege. And simply through the nature of who they were born to and where they live, those kids, their ladder is this high. It doesn't mean that they aren't working hard or they don't want it as bad, but we who hold those positions of privilege and power have to acknowledge that. Despite being good-intentioned people who don't condone the isms. And so, our task is not to say, well, let's bring this ladder down. It's to say, how can we fight to bring the other ladder up and to promote equity and access? And if we don't do this, and we just continue to march along in our areas of privilege, and you notice that I'm not just focusing on race. I mean, it's all the isms. It's all the marginalized populations. If we don't recognize our role in that, then we can easily engage in discrimination. And we can do that as therapists as well. Discrimination isn't just, calling people names and, engaging in overt ways in which we maintain oppression, we can engage in discrimination in lots of unintentional ways too. Through denial, through minimization, those are forms of discrimination. So what are some ways that you all have seen or are aware of that discriminatory practices can occur in the therapy rooms, in agencies, in sessions? What are some ways? Through who said that? Yeah, how?
Because some people may not have the insurance that will pay for visits, or have the income to pay them, to self-pay.
Yes.
Or the agency that they're trying to get assistance from may not have a Simon pay scale
Yes.
to accommodate those who can't pay or don't have insurance that will pay.
Absolutely, yes. I saw a hand over here too.
Well, I was tracking with what you were saying about privileges, and some of them are overt and some of them are covert, in the sense that, yes, we can say socioeconomically, I'm not saying anything about your family, but okay, so you have that privilege, but that doesn't necessarily mean, I look at the strength-based stuff. Maybe I don't have a socioeconomically higher up family, but they have a whole nother sense of wealth.
Oh yeah,
I mean, maybe
definitely.
there's a lot of stuff going on over at your place that there's stronger things going on here.
Absolutely,
So
yes.
sometimes
And
we
we're
have
going to talk about that
Yeah.
too. Yes. But how about with regard to other ways that therapists can engage in discriminatory practices?
I don't know that it's the therapist, but if you don't have any money, you're limited to what agency you can even go to, what amount of specialized help if you needed something specialized. Sorry, working at the VA, anybody off the street literally can get a whole bunch of stuff, and most people don't have access to any kind of mental health, physical health, specialized treatment or anything.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
before they ever even get to the therapist.
Yes.
I think when therapists go wrong is when you continue to compare, blend your clients. Oh, here goes another person, another manic depressive, or whatever, and you start to label everyone under those same diagnoses, and not seeing them as individuals.
Absolutely, yes. Did you have something too?
Just that sometimes it's transportation, that they'd have no way of getting to the place, even if they find a place. I know in Williamsburg it's difficult to find a psychiatrist because there just are few and far between. And when they do get set up with a psychiatrist, they usually have to wait kind of a long time before they can see him. You need to see him right away, and that's the problem.
What about the therapist who says I'm blind to color?
Yes. Being colorblind. It's a nice thing that people typically are coming from a good place. It's actually a discriminatory statement, because when we say we're colorblind, we're failing to acknowledge the importance of the role of culture. We're dishonoring this whole part of our client by just kind of pretending that we're the same. Minimizing and overlooking the lack of diversity in an agency is discrimination. By not challenging policies that aren't inclusive, that's discrimination. And we typically, who read your policy manual lately? We don't often do that. But by ignoring it, that's discrimination. By utilizing therapeutic approaches that we're really comfortable with, but not knowing where they stem from, not knowing who they're normed on, not knowing if they're appropriate really across cultures. That's discriminatory practice. We have to be careful.
I just wanted to say that I think it's discriminatory to put you in any category because I'm a peer recovery specialist and I work with groups and they cycle through pretty quickly into a crisis mental hospital. Every single group is different and every individual is different. Every one of them.
And that's that intersectionality piece, because
Can I finish? I don't even want to know their diagnosis. I want to hear what they have to say about their own traumas, and everyone's
Yes.
different. Every single person.
That is true.
So like snowflakes.
And the intersectionality piece becomes important in that because if we are just making assumptions based on what we see, then we're failing to miss the totality of the individual.
All right. Okay. Well, we've been talking a lot of theory. Let's bring it back down into practice here. All right. So as helping professionals, how do we address issues of intersectionality and oppression? Well, first we understand our own. We take some time, we look inward. And then we help and explore our clients and help them get a better picture of what they are. And then we create this space between us to explore feelings that come up because of those two different worlds. We have to, and we're going to walk through it. But now we got to create this space to deal with that because there's clearly two different places. And there's a relationship in between that we must develop. Fortunately for us, I have another activity. All right. I'm big on activities, as you can tell, and so we're going to jump right into this next one. You should find a identities handout there. It looks like a big throwing star. There you go. All right. On this identity sheet, you'll see, if you take a minute here to read through them, there's all these identities listed on that wheel. All right, and if you see one that should be there, draw it in. I want everyone here to take a minute, take their pen out, and circle the identity that they subscribe to. Don't be shy. Something like the way that you, see yourself. All right. Note where they fall on the axis. How do you feel about them? Excuse me?
I want to challenge you.
You want to challenge me?
I don't feel oppressed, and I'm 80 years old.
All right, well, I'm going to challenge you to circle as many of those that you feel. And if you may not feel challenged.
I'm one step from the bottom.
And it's...
No, seriously, where did you get your statistics from?
The challenge to you would be to recognize that the many of the reasons that you might not feel oppressed or marginalized by age is because potentially there are so many other privileged statuses that you hold that negate the experience of marginalization in the marginalized statuses that exist, because we are a combination of everything. If you were just age, then maybe the experience would be different. But when it's also balanced with these other identities, which is what we're talking about, the combination is what creates the experience.
Yeah, but this is setting up an identity that I will not subscribe to, and I don't really agree with you. Because everybody in here comes from a very different background. They have different parents, different everything.
And thus the need to be able to identify, who am I? Who am I compared to you?
Well, okay, well, let me ask you to humor me in the activity. Circle the ones, and we'll see how this plays out. And maybe you'll feel differently, maybe you'll feel the same, but let's walk through the activity together.
Well, is it somewhat about not even just how we see ourselves, but how we are seen by other people? The first thing people are going to notice about me is I'm female, or I'm black, or I'm whatever. And so it's not just about how I see myself, or is that all you're looking for right now?
Right now is
myself?
define yourself. Right now, define yourself on the...
All right, so has everyone circled their identities?
And you can add other components of self to this diagram if it doesn't cover who you are.
All right, once you've done that, I want you guys to turn inward to your table, and you're going to have a conversation with your table. And I invite you to join a larger table, sir, just so you can get a more rich experience. And have a conversation in the table, and everyone kind of take turns, listen up, take turns and disclose your identities and pay attention to the feelings that are evoked as you do so. Those listening, pay attention to the feelings that arise as you take in what's being shared. All right? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to do that.
And sir, excuse me, sir, I would like to challenge you to sit at a table where you can hear a bigger table with people who are diverse and different from you, so that you have the opportunity to hear how they describe themselves and some of the experiences that have resulted in feelings of marginalization, because that is how we become informed and culturally sensitive about others' experiences beyond ourselves.
I'm going to decline that because I'm a clinical psychologist and I have a real problem with labeling.
With what?
As a clinical psychologist, I have a lot of problem with labeling people. And that's why I'm reacting to this. When you've got the name, you've got to play the game.
But sir, what we're asking for is that people identify themselves. You're not labeling others, you're identifying yourself and gaining self-awareness through your exploration of understanding who am I as a person interacting in this world.
All right, you guys have about 3 or 4 minutes to process. All right, we're going to take a minute, guys, to process what we just went through here. And I'm going to look for feedback from the tables. And the question I'm asking of you is not so much raise your hand and disclose all your identities. What I'm asking of you is to reflect on the experience you just went through and share the feeling that you had during the process of you disclosing to someone else these facets of you, and also those of you who are observing or the client, the feelings brought up by receiving, or as a therapist, receiving this information from someone else. There's 2 sets of feelings I'm looking for here during the process. Yes, ma'am.
I felt a little shocked because most of mine were on the privileged side, and I don't really view myself as being privileged, but of course it's showing that I am more on the privileged side, so that was a little shocking for me.
Okay. And how did it feel? It was shocking to you as you said it out loud? Like it, when you were sharing it with the group, what were their feelings of you sharing that?
I was kind of like, oh, privilege. When he said, so you're more on the privileged side, I was like, really? Like, I didn't think that I was on the privileged side.
Yes, sir.
I felt kind of conflicted.
Okay.
Because in agreement with her, a lot of the things, I felt more so on the privileged side, but I felt like some of those were, I almost felt like they're kind of could have been 2 different charts. One that was things that were seen privileges and one that were not.
Yes, excellent point. Seen and unseen privileges.
When it came to like credentialed, highly literate, nobody would necessarily know that by looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not something that it rarely ever works in my favor, except for maybe in the workforce. But even then, there are other factors that kind of almost make me marginalized as more so than privileged.
So by you sharing that out loud, was there a sense of being heard at that level then? I mean,
yeah, we all kind of had that kind of like aha kind of.
Gotcha. All right, who else? Feelings brought up during the session.
I got to share that I'm both credentialed as a doctorate level student, but I'm also first generation college student, and some of the hardship that had going away to college and my family feeling like, oh, you think you're so smart, you're using big words,
right?
And kind of just getting the support as people listen to that as and understanding that.
Okay, so it's almost like you were filling in the story, that the unheard side. Yes. Yeah. Okay. What else?
I saw that it could, for me, it could have been either way. Not so much privilege, not so far marginalized. It's like 1 or 2 things could have went. It could have just gone either way. But I don't see myself as privileged, but I don't see myself as necessarily marginalized either.
Okay. Yeah, saying it out loud brings a different tone to it, because it's not just something, it's more of an awareness. Yeah. How about feelings of someone receiving that information? What was it like to hear someone disclose something that you may not have been aware of? Yes?
One thing that we got to talking about that wasn't on the chart was being a parent. And we kind of got into the discussion of parent as a family unit and parent as a single parent. And I know personally in my experience, whenever somebody says they're a single parent, people kind of almost have that kind of like all kind of face. And So just bring the question, so where would that fall? Would that fall into privileged or marginalized, and which of the two play that part? Because I find that people who are parents, that's a privilege, but also because it's privilege, but in a good sense. Like, that's something great, not necessarily gives you a foot above somebody else. So it's kind of one of those weird areas.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
For our table, what was interesting as we touched base on young, how we identify ourselves due to our age, and we all agreed that it was all about how you feel, not about the age. But if you feel young, then you're young, but how others and them see you.
Okay, so what I heard you say was the feeling that you shared the table. Okay, you had a sense of sharing something there. Okay, so there was a feeling of connection. I'm looking for feelings on the process of the act. Like, what stood out as you guys did this, took place in this? What stood out about the process? Yes, ma'am.
So when I was disclosing, I was very aware that most of mine are privileges. And so I had a few thoughts that went through my mind, like I wonder if they're going to see me any differently because I'm so privileged.
There's a level of intimacy involved in this, isn't there? I mean, it's a literally opening up and acknowledging yes, 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 yes.
And it's also not so concrete. I mean, it's as you all noted that, well, kind of this, but not to the extreme end of either of the continuums that the axes cross, or, well, it's not really all inclusive. I feel like I should add a couple of things. And I think one of the most important aspects is that when we have privileges that are out there or marginalizations that are seen, they can tend to have a greater impact on our experience. And so, the intersectionality piece is so critical in that, to be able to acknowledge the experience of people, their lived experience. And again, this isn't you saying, I call you this, this, and this. This is, how do you, my client, define yourself? And what is your lived experience within those multiple identities? And to say, well, it doesn't matter, it does to that client. To that client, it's very important and it's very lived. And if we were to ignore that, then we're missing important opportunities for support or resources or processing with that client, their experience. But it's them, the client, who has to identify that. And so, wherever it falls on the axis, whether it's in the privilege or marginalization, what is the lived experience? So it might not matter so much that so many might fall on the privileged area, because the experience of marginalization in one area might really supersede a lot of those kind of hidden privileges that are on the other end of the spectrum.
Yes. Some key words I kept popping up, guys, where there's this being pulled two different directions, some confliction, some, it says here I am, but I don't feel that way. This kind of sense of there's room there for self-awareness. I mean, there's actually room there for some wow, what else is going on that I'm not fully aware of? And that's just us taking a moment to look at ourselves. Now sitting down and helping someone else for the first time look at themselves.
Silly example, but I put I'm short as a marginalization because I'm not even 5 foot. That's why I need to have my feet up, car pedals, and all that. And when I share that, she's like, "Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm short too." And that's not a real obvious one. But the world is not made for short people.
And I was going to ask about that. I'm 5 feet, just barely, and the world is definitely meant for taller people. And there's even research that says it's better to be 4 inches taller and have a degree from a lesser school than to be 4 inches shorter and have a degree from one of the Ivy League, Harvard type schools. Because people are literally looking up to you. And I don't see weight on here.
Yeah.
If you're a fat kid, you're screwed. The kid, it's not fair. And you're going to get pushed aside.
But I think that's where somebody might label themselves as attractive versus unattractive.
It could fit in there.
In that I was struggling. Okay, what are the things I'm underlying? Am I this or am I that? What is their definition
Ooh, you guys are
of
getting it here.
being?
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah,
I,
you're getting it.
labeling myself, and I didn't share. We didn't get around that way. It's also different when you speak it.
Yes.
Yes.
You guys are kind of hitting on the next portion of our slideshow, guys. It's a great lead-in. We're going to keep you in suspense here a moment. All right? We're going to give you a little break. 5 minutes, guys. Grab some food, use the restroom, but come back here and sit down. All right?
So we talked about, the value and the need to get at not only an understanding of ourselves, but the value in understanding how our clients identify, and how do we go about doing that? So there's this model, the respectful model, which can be a really kind of concrete assessment tool for you to take into your work. You can use this in a very formal manner at an intake session and just kind of go down the questions. Or you can do it informally through dialogue, where each of these areas ultimately emerge through your discussions with your clients. But it covers, you can see most of what was on that diagram. And then, obviously you would want to open it up and invite the client to describe themselves as much as possible beyond this model or that diagram. But it covers everything from, spiritual identity to traumas experienced to location of residence. And it's pretty incredible to recognize the impact geography has on our cultural experience. I mean, we all know that somebody from New York City is quite different than somebody from Mobile, Alabama. And that understanding can help you to acknowledge different experience and understand different barriers. And so, even that becomes a useful tool for understanding. It also is really useful for not only your understanding, but enhancing your client's understanding of self. And what I've found is that those who do hold more positions of privilege see themselves less culturally. So like when I'm teaching a class and on the first day and I'll say, describe your 3 things about your culture. And some of my particularly white students will be like, I don't know, I'm just an American. And it's like, well, let's look beyond that. What are all these aspects that can be part of one's cultural identity? So this can be used not just for your understanding of your client, but for clients to gain a deeper appreciation of who they are. But once you have asked your clients to describe themselves, particularly when it comes to owning their marginalized identities, owning those pieces, seeing those pieces, and you've engaged in dialogue around experiences that are associated with those marginalized identities, a lot of feelings can emerge, and some tough feelings. Maybe it's a sense of powerlessness or hopelessness, or maybe it's anger and rage. I mean, all types of different feelings can emerge. And what do you do with that? As a helper, there are things you can do. There are, and this goes to what was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of individual strengths in every identity. There are certainly, being able to acknowledge fewer barriers that come with privileged status, but in terms of marginalized statuses, it takes a lot of resilience in order to cope with an oppressive society. And so, pointing out the strength and resilience, the resources that are needed to cope in a society that's inequitable. Being able to highlight strengths can be used to kind of counter some of the sense of hopelessness that might emerge. Focusing on empowerment. I mean, we can empower our clients. Sometimes we do a lot of the work to help empower them, and sometimes we give them the tools to learn how to advocate it for themselves or to feel a sense of empowerment. Help individuals accept their realities. having individuals recognize and move through identity development into a place of self-love, self-acceptance is important, because that's challenging to do when we live in a sick society. So helping our clients recognize it's not you that's bad or wrong or non-conforming or not working hard enough. It's our society that is not allowing those levels of equity to exist for you. So, build upon those strengths and empower and help come to a space of self-acceptance and allow the client to understand that it's society that needs changing. And that ultimately will help the individual to resist that internalization. And internalized sexism, internalized racism, internalized ableism, ageism, all the isms are very common and really detrimental, because often that internalized ism is also projected on others like me. So I might say, God, it sucks to be a woman, and and all women are bitches, and that isn't healthy. So rather, being able to say, I am proud of who I am. I understand that there are a lot more challenges. I'm making less money than my male counterparts. I'm, experiencing different treatment at work because of my gender. I have fewer opportunities in different work environments. You can go across the board. But I value who I am, and it's that system that's problematic. And I'm going to be supportive of my fellow women to fight this system and not internalize and project this kind of negativity on the people that are most like me. So these are all techniques to address some of the experiences that emerge through your client's deeper level of self-understanding of their identities. And what are other things? Did you want to add to that?
Are we doing the same thing, though, if we say that society is sick? Are we labeling it?
Well, in terms of recognizing, helping clients to understand that it isn't their fault, they're not the victim. I think that when we're saying that society is sick, we're challenging meritocracy for the client. So when the client is trying really hard, but their ladder is this high, and they're seeing people with ladders this high go here, then it's easy for someone to say, well, there's something wrong with me. I'm problematic, I'm bad, I'm not good enough. And rather, we're able to say, wait a minute, you're trying really hard, but the barriers that society has set, these systemic institutional barriers that are there, are real, and they're wrong, they're bad. It's not you that's problematic, it's the system that needs to be impacted. And so, and that doesn't necessarily get rid of those barriers, but it certainly helps the client not to self-blame for not having as great of access or the ability to access things as others.
I guess I just have a problem with the word sick.
Yeah, and it's extreme. I mean, you can call it whatever you want, but in terms of the kind of progressive, culturally alert literature, there's a lot around our society being sick and us needing to make change within society. But yes, I mean, however you would frame that. Are there other things you would add to this, anybody? Other things? Okay, and we can certainly take time to process those more as we go on. But, okay.
All right, we spent some time talking about, how, looking at ourselves, viewing us, our makeup. We've also spent a little bit of time on how we view our client. There's a third dimension taking place in that room, how the client views us. From the moment they walk in the door, they're looking at how your office is set up, they're looking at what you're wearing, they're making assumptions, they're listening to your accent, they're making more assumptions. There's a lot going on without any words taking place and how the client is viewing you. So we're gonna take a minute and we're gonna talk about that. And one way of doing this is through broaching. Broaching's awesome. What is broaching? Bring up something. Seeing that white elephant in the room, taking a shot at it. What is broaching? All right, what we have here.
Broaching is inviting discussion about the differences that exist. And again, this is not easy to do. Anything around this topic tends to challenge people because one of the things that we are trained to do is not talk about this stuff.
We're trained to be polite, tiptoe around these subjects.
Yes, we stay away from talking about racial differences. We stay away from highlighting how I'm different from you. But like we mentioned, by ignoring that and overlooking it, then we minimize the impact and the power of those differences. We fail to see that it can actually be harming the client-counselor relationship.
The fear of doing harm, there's a fear of saying the wrong thing, and not saying anything is actually doing harm. So even fear of doing harm is doing harm.
So by broaching difference and you being the one to bring that up, then we can clarify how the individual is feeling about working with you. We can help to clarify some communication norms. You can then really focus on building this authentic, real relationship. You have now modeled, we can talk about those things in here that normally we don't talk about. This is a safe space for doing that. And that can be really powerful. So,
how to broach? How do we do it? Well, let's start simple and we'll work our way up. Ask questions. Don't make assumptions. The first and foremost. There's a little spider sense tingling about something there. I'm not going to make an assumption I know what it is. I'm going to help dive in and ask questions. I'm going to be sensitive. I'm not going to say, obviously there's a difference. Let's talk about it. No, I'm going to be sensitive to what's going on here and ask at a level that's acceptable. I'm going to respond empathically. When someone is cracking the door to let me in, I'm not going to slam that door shut, nor am I going to throw it wide open. I'm going to ease them into the conversation. Let's see. What I'm doing is I'm gathering information. Every one of these, and I'm talking, when we broach, we're broaching early in the relationship. Session 1, session 2. It may seem like, whoa, we're hitting a lot early on, but this is all information we need to further the relationship. We don't want to have to broach later on during some pivotal moment of the session, and all of a sudden there's this big elephant getting in the way of taking this next step when we should have dealt with that elephant early on.
I have a great example of that. I was a family therapist, and I had a Latino family that I was working with, and in the very beginning, I broached and said, I want to make it clear I'm not Latina, and I don't speak Spanish, and I want to make sure that anything that I say or do that is against or in contrast to your cultural norms, please let me know, because I want to make sure that our differing cultures don't get in the way of us being able to be effective together. And they were like, all right, yeah, no big, whatever. And then it was a couple months later, and I asked the family to engage in an enactment around the parents around bills, and because they were really struggling with communication. And so they turned to each other and they start talking, and it like within a sentence, they switch to Spanish. And they're going, and it's heated, and they're back and forth, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, I have no clue what they're saying. And after they were done, I was like, thank you, okay. Do you remember when we talked right at the beginning of our work together about us being culturally different and me not speaking Spanish? I'm really sorry, but I just missed that whole engagement. And we laughed about it for a second, and then they just told me what they were saying, and we were able to barely shift away from the process because we had already broached. If I hadn't done that in the beginning, then in that moment, I would have had to be like, well, You've probably noticed over the last couple months that I'm not Spanish or Latino. And by the way, I don't speak Spanish. And then it would have shifted away from the therapeutic process to trying to work through our cultural differences. And instead, it didn't have to happen because it had been broached in the beginning. Even though the client in the beginning was like, okay, whatever. It became important later on. And so, just because this isn't comfortable, just because it's a new skill, doesn't mean that it isn't really of great value.
Yes, I mean, gosh, broaching, the term itself implies passing through a threshold, cresting. I mean, it's supposed to be, whoa, we've made it through that. We're coming over or passing into a different area. It's not supposed to be easy. And, and the first time you do it, you think it's going to be uncomfortable? Do you think it's going to be similar to, like, remember back in you're just learning to be a therapist and you're asked to reflect feelings and you're sitting there and you're like, so I'm concentrating so hard for what's the word, and it's just, you're not in the moment and it's uncomfortable and it's awkward, and I mean, your body language is probably horrible, and so, and that's what it's like in broaching the first couple times you do it. I mean, it's new ground. Broaching needs to be practiced like anything else.
And the more that you practice it, the more comfortable it is, and then you're also modeling that comfort level in talking about culture to your clients.
Yes. I mean, you think the very first time you want to broach is going to be in that pivotal moment, and it's going to be awkward, and you think that the patient's going to pick up on your awkward. They're going to pick up on, like, whoa, we're doing something that even my therapist isn't comfortable with. No, it's something that we want to have a handle on. So when we smoothly transition into this difficult topic, the client is feeding off of my comfort and creating that safe space so that they can open up further.
So let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, so luckily we have an activity. Yes! All right, the last handout you have there, you have a broaching handout. All right, what I want you to do, all right, this is going to be a stretch for some of you, but I'm going to need participation again. All right, I'm going to want you guys to turn to someone that you didn't come into the room with, guys. All right, that means the person you walked into this room and sat down, that's not who I want you to talk to right now. So you might have to move around. You might have to find someone. And what I want you guys to do is to get into triads. So I want a therapist, a client, and an observer in these little groups.
Just like practicing reflecting feelings.
There you go, just like the old days. All right, so I'm going to have the counselor look at the broaching questions, pick 1, 2, or 3 of them, and ask the patient the question. Just broach the subject. I want the patient to respond, open up, and have a little dialogue going back and forth. The observer, you can jump in there, key in, add some more if need be, and we're going to do this for a couple minutes. We're going to practice these hard questions. I want a discussion to take place, some dialogue, an exchange going back and forth. We're going to do it for about 2 minutes each group so that everybody has a chance to be a therapist, and then we'll process this afterwards.
And you don't have to go down the list and ask every one of them. Go through and look at what feels comfortable to you to try to practice. Or come up with your own. That's fine too.
And
These are suggestions for broaching.
This should be uncomfortable being your first time doing this. I'm challenging you now. You came to this session to learn something. Cultural sensitivity. That's what I'm asking of you now. Let's begin this process.
Okay. So break into triads.
Triads. All right. And time. Let's bring it back in, bring it back in. All right, again, much like before, what I'm looking for in terms of feedback is the experience of the process, you know. What did you feel as you were broaching? Awkward?
For me, it was kind of natural. Only because we were role playing in this particular scenario, but I know being that with the client population that I work with, I always kind of upfront, like, I don't know what's going on, so you kind of got to tell me. You know, I don't make that assumption because I get clients who make assumptions about me the first moment they meet me. You got your stuff together. I really don't.
And that kind of broaching there at that level, how disarming and engaging and bringing the relationship together that is. I mean, taking yourself off the pedestal you're already on. Yeah.
And the group up here brought up a really good point about, you know, at what level do we self-disclose? You know, and we have to be aware that we, the one lady was saying, I think very wisely, I'm willing to disclose, but I'm not giving them my home phone number, you know, and so, you know, and that's true. And a lot of times our level of self-disclosure might be on our most externally visible things that are in contrast to our clients. You know, being able to say, well, you know, obviously I'm a woman and you're a man. Well, I want to make sure that our gender differences don't get in the way of us being able to work well together. So, you know, help me understand how you feel about working with me. You know, can be just something, the more obvious without high levels of self-disclosure.
All right.
How about others?
Other
The experience of it.
Well, because we just dived into the questions and didn't do the, I guess, the proper way of how it would have evolved, my first inkling in my head when he was saying, oh, okay, I thought, oh gosh, why is he telling me this? Does he have a problem because I'm an Asian female? I mean, because the disclosure, I'm like, oh gosh, does he have a problem because I'm different?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
See, the thing is, I would never have done that.
Yeah.
We need to do it.
And what would make it better, easier, more comfortable, more conducive to promoting the authentic relationship?
Well, there's any number of ways, but I get a fair amount of time to interact with the person, and I start slow and you know, in a kind way, and just work with them and look at each of them's different, and I think that's cool.
Yeah, and I think that really goes back to that, you know, ask questions but be sensitive and not aggressive, you know, because if it's just, okay, sit down, so, you know, this is who I am, who are you? You know, that can be like, whoa, wait a minute. And that's oftentimes because we're so uncomfortable talking about culture that we're not used to people saying, this is who I am, who are you? You know, define ourselves openly. I mean, we don't do that. So, you know, we have to be aware of how our clients receive that information and make sure it's sensitive, you know, in that way.
And that's really true. What you were saying about the pedestal thing, it can't be like this. It
Yeah.
doesn't work that way. It's got to be like this. You know, and yeah.
It takes time, and you know, even by session 2, you look at the respectful model there, and you're like, you can mentally a checklist. Do I know this? Do I know that? Wow, I have no clue about these 3 areas. You know, it's worth looking into. It's worth broaching. And
So see it being kind of worked into a little bit of the initial housekeeping stuff.
Yeah.
You know, just, and in the course of you covered like, okay, where the bathrooms are and how this works, and do you have questions, and oh, by the way, as you're going along, you know, there's going to be some things about you I may not understand, or you may want to ask me, or of course, obviously, depending on who you're working with, and just just moving through the checklist.
during intake, I mean, you actually, when they come in and you have that power differential, they're okay, sign here, take care of this. They're already in this mode of, okay, you know what you're doing, obviously.
I find ways of getting access to the person personally in a fun, nice way. And a lot of times it'll be an age thing because I'm 63, and the thing is I've taught young people from my whole life. And so if they're like, if I find, a lot of times I'll ask them how old they are because it makes a difference to me. And when I find that out, that gives me a spectrum of where to start. If they're 25, I might ask them, are you into Harry Potter? And if they are, we can start talking about that. And so on.
All right. Another feedback on the experience. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I just want to say one thing. When we are looking at this, we do have to be mindful of what we bring to the table as a therapist. Because I know we were doing our role play. Of course, I was the client. And I came in and I said, identify myself as a lesbian. And we talked about the preconceived notions when you think about, okay, when were you molested? When were you abused? So I now we've developed a new category. I'm an undamaged lesbian.
That's great. And really just kind of, in summation on this particular skill, recognize that just because it might have been awkward or difficult to practice this right now doesn't mean it's not critically important. And so you recognize the more you practice it, the more you will be able to sit there with a client and engage in this dialogue about culture more comfortably, which will then in turn model for your clients that it is a positive and it is useful to have that open dialogue. So you and then you, yes.
Well, related to that, I believe the Brené Brown new book, Braving the Wilderness, is about having these kind of different kinds of conversations, and it was just released this week.
Wow, that's great. I'll have to pick it up. Love her.
But it is about how to have these difficult conversations and go into that wilderness with other people.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's not just for therapists, it's for
People in
with our
general.
own lives.
Yes.
Brené Brown.
Brené.
B-R-E-N-E.
Yes, sir.
Just from my experience right here, unfortunately, I was sitting with older white women. But for me, I guess because I do life skills and I do job readiness for Central Child Protective Services, so I'm used to dealing with different cultures, different backgrounds. I go into the jails and prisons and do groups as well. So it really wasn't uncomfortable for me. I don't know if that's a good thing or
That's
bad.
great.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's where you want to
great.
be.
Yeah. And one other little aspect of this too is that, just because you are comfortable having that dialogue doesn't mean your client is. And so, when they are resistant or uncomfortable with it, again, just because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean it's not an important thing to still talk about. And so we still are in the position to recognize the value in this. Again, it's really not about us. Yes, we get the information about who they are, but it's really for your client. It's so that your client knows that you are aware of cultural variations in that room. It's so they are given permission to have this type of dialogue, and they are able to form a tighter connection with you. So it's really not about you. It's really about the client.
We're breaking down that wall of under the voice saying, you don't understand. You don't know what it's like to be me. You don't know. It's different. By you broaching, taking those steps, you're slowly bringing that barrier down a little bit.
And you're calling it, you're right. I can't understand that. And that's why we need to be able to, work together to help me understand, and that allows that bridge, the broaching bridge. Basically, up to this point, we have focused on, having that awareness of individual shared and cultural specific traits. We've talked a lot about the role of oppression and the myth of meritocracy utilized through the activities and some different strategies for connecting and getting to know about clients. We focused on communication styles and how we can build comfort level with broaching. And we don't have a lot of time, but we wanted to also touch on another area of culturally alert helping that moves outside of the therapy room. In order to really be culturally alert and move toward cultural competence, we have to be advocates and extend beyond the sessions that we have with our clients.
All right. So what is advocacy? Besides taking it to the next level, what is advocacy?
Speaking up for things.
Speaking up.
Not just letting it go
Technical
by.
definition is active support of something or a cause. Yeah. But maybe a more clinical definition, one that we can use, is advocacy is confronting a power dynamic to help those in need. All right, advocacy. We can look at it from 3 different levels we can operate in. The national level, state level, where you're going to conventions, you're maybe attending a protest, you're calling your congressman. These are all levels that we can operate on at that level. The community level, school, workplace, neighborhood. This is the day-to-day activities that you engage in. This is something you're going to have a lot of contact in. At those levels, what can be done? At what level you can challenge the system in your workplace. You can challenge the system at school. And then the third level, the more intimate one, is the family level, where are children, elderly, and abused. At this level, the more intimate one, this is where your individual sessions will come into play.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we often think of advocates as being those amazing figures in our history. Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Mother Teresa. And yes, they were amazing advocates. But everybody can be an advocate. Every single one of us can be an advocate. And in fact, all of our ethical codes also speak to that as being one of our essential roles that we must follow. So not only are we capable of it, but we are expected to do it as part of our professional obligations. But what does it take to do that? Some particular kind of traits and characteristics are really necessary in order to be an effective advocate. Things like being altruistic, having a giving nature, being willing to take risks. Because it's tough when you acknowledge that a policy is exclusive or it's limiting access, and you have to go and challenge the authorities. Challenge maybe your supervisor, your boss, the administrative management. I mean, that's tough to do. So it takes courage and the willingness to take risks. It requires autonomous thinking. Yes.
What's autonomous?
Oh my gosh. Autonomous thinking. And just to save time, we'll dive through it. You have to be able to see outside the box. When you're thinking autonomously, you're not just going with the flow. And again, using that agency example, we can have agencies that we've worked in for years that follow the same policies, and people come in and conform to it. And like a small example I can use is when I was a school counselor, the language was, here's the guidance counselor's office. And everybody from the superintendent down called us guidance counselors. And I was part of American School Counseling Association, which made a big movement to shift away from that language and call us school counselors. And so, I would have to challenge the principal, like when she'd be like, oh, this is our guidance counselor. Actually, I'm the school counselor. Just in lots of little ways when she was making my business. So can you please put school counselor on there, not guidance counselor? So we can advocate on behalf of our profession, and we can advocate on behalf of our clients, but it can be challenging. And having that stick-to-itiveness, advocacy is really, really hard. Change takes time. And so a lot of times what you're faced with is, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. 4 steps forward, 2 steps back. And it can be exhausting and frustrating. So having, burnout prevention and self-care techniques without giving up, as well as leadership skills. I mean, a lot of these efforts, you might notice something is wrong, but who's going to be the one to step up and actually do something about it? You've got to be willing to have those leadership skills to get that done. Anything else you can think of that is necessary to be a good advocate?
One thing when I hear this list is all well and good, but I see what our system tends to run over people too, in the sense of ask them, or start where the client is. Ask them what is important to them.
Yes.
I may think, okay, well, you need a new civic center. You need this. You need that. Oh, no.
Yeah.
What do you tell me?
And part of our ethics codes state that, that we need to not be making assumptions again about what our clients need, but rather enlist them in the process. So absolutely. Sorry, let me grab her first and then I'll come back.
This might be a minor digression, but since what we call people often colors the way we look at them or treat them, I would reference back to your previous slide of the elderly.
Yes.
Nowadays, we really call us older adults.
Yes.
And
Okay.
we really try not to use, working with older adults, we try not to use elderly.
Okay.
Although it's still in the literature, and in some cases, it might not be inappropriate, but on a
Yes.
regular vernacular basis, it's really more respectful to call
Yes.
people older adults.
And that's great feedback. I mean, that's advocacy right here. And that's the type of feedback that really helps to shape how systems change. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Martin borrowed from Gandhi the nonviolence,
Yes.
and that's why he was so effective.
Yes.
And basically, what I do in the hospital, it's a crisis mental hospital, and I insist that they not use profanity. And every time I hear a profane word, I go, bing, like that. And just to remind them, not because we told them, because it's violent language. People are used to being
You're right.
abused.
Being nonviolent is
Yeah.
another really good skill to have. And beyond that, some of the things that we need to know are systems theory. We have to be able to see our clients and how they exist in the broader systems in which they function. So, it's not enough to just have an awareness of the individual struggles, maybe even within their family, but where is that positioned in the community? So let's take, for example, working with a transgendered individual. What at the individual level, there's lots of ways to help that individual on behalf of him, help the individual learn self-empowerment, self-advocacy. Then, how is the community in which that individual is living responding? And what are barriers there that need to be addressed? And then what at the national societal level needs to be looked at with regard to laws and rules. And so we can take one individual, and if we have an awareness of systems, it can expand well beyond that individual. And the laws are important. Just because it's law or policy doesn't mean it's good. But at other times, we can turn to the law and policies to support our advocacy efforts, And so you've got to know what they are, though, in order to know whether you can use them to support or if you need to challenge them to change. Thank God there were people in the 1960s who didn't like the Jim Crow laws and thought they were bad. And wasn't just like, well, it's the law. We'll just, I guess I'll have to deal. They were autonomous thinkers, and they challenged that and got the law changed. Our society would be even different, more different than it is today without that. As well as resources. This is a big one because a lot of times we're like, okay, I really want to do something, but what do I do? And you can put a lot of energy and effort into figuring out things to do on your own, or you can go to what's already out there. There are so many organizations in support of pretty much every single possible advocacy effort you could dream of out there already. So contact them and use their resources. Whether it's they'll send you flyers and materials or activities or presentations, all kinds of stuff that you can use, as well as lists of support for your clients, different things like that. So use what's out there. Don't reinvent the wheel.
All right, preparing for advocacy. Guys, here's a game plan. There's one of many. This is an 8-step plan on how to address an issue. The first thing, it comes up. You're identifying an issue. Bing. This is something, it's not right. I want to affect change. Look around. You are the only person who sees it. Surely there are others who feel the same way. Form a team. You don't have to do this alone. The team, if they all can see the same issue, you guys can work together. Communicate with your team. Articulate clear goals. What exactly do you want to change when you sit down? Target areas of influence. All right, guys, the resources we just got through talking about. What are available to us? I'm sure this isn't the first time this has happened in an agency like this. Reach out. There's other resources you can tap and bring back so that you can better achieve the goals you set out. Strategies. When you sit down with your team, now we're going to overlay those resources and what's available to us, what can work here. Create a plan. You sit down with your teammates. In your team, you sit down, you work out, all right, we're going to end up doing this. We're going to have to submit our paperwork here. Create the plan and then design infrastructure for it. What does that mean? It means if we're going to do flyers, you're going to print the flyer. Jerry, you're going to do flyers, all right? All right, Sarah, you're going to go out and you're going to make sure you get copies of the flyers, all right? And then Terry, you're going to hang the flyers, you know, and then we're going to have to evaluate, is it working? Is our plan working? If it is, let's do more of it. If it's not, let's readdress. So each one of these builds on the next. You know, it's one of many plans to affect change. Yeah, we can work through it.
And you know, advocacy, you can take an entire course, semester-long course on how to be an advocate. So clearly, we just showed you like 4 slides and say, okay, go out and do it. You know, this isn't inclusive, but it's really just a prompt, you know, a plug to say, look beyond the session, look beyond the individual, and recognize that culturally alert helping extends to the realm of advocacy, and you are capable of doing this. So in closing, developing an awareness for life beyond your immediate surroundings brings a healthy restlessness, which, if infused with peace and used well, can be a positive foundation for change in the world. So you know, we ask that you sit and reflect on the experience, you know, what resonated, what's easy, what was challenging, and consider how you can apply some of these skills in a way that's going to promote greater access and greater equity for the clients that you serve.
All right, guys. Any questions?